The car did lead to the disappearance of the vast majority of horses. In this case, we are the horses. And the horses were headed to the glue factory after cars were invented.
I think the problem becomes with technology like AI that you get to the brink and you think, no, I want to step back, but it's too late.
What we should avoid is superintelligence, AI that is built to replace all humans at all tasks and to make us not be in control of our economy anymore.
And what happens if we don't? If we let this run riot? You think this is the beginning of the storm? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. It's not just Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt facing a future on the unemployment line. In the week when a convincingly lifelike AI video of the two megastars slugging it out went viral and caused a meltdown in Hollywood, unemployment stats here have hit a 5-year high, with young people the biggest losers. So is it simply the result of weak growth and higher business costs? Or are we already seeing the impact of artificial intelligence on hiring? Whether you're an entry-level student, white-collar worker, or Hollywood heavyweight. To discuss this, I'm joined by our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, and Andrea Miotti from Control AI, which is a campaign group warning about the dangerous future of AI. Helia, first of all, how bad are the figures and what's causing them?
Today's figures in the UK, you had unemployment up at 5.2%, and youth unemployment, you talk about decade high at the moment, 16.1%. Most of that is still, we're not seeing the evidence of AI being the cause for that. The biggest cause for that is because entry-level jobs go to young people, and those are the ones that are on the front line when it comes to higher business cuts. When the Chancellor raises taxes, raises national insurance, those are the jobs. That's where companies are not hiring.
But don't companies need entry-level people? I mean, why are they deciding that they don't need as many people?
I'm having this conversation so often these days with city executives at banks, at professional firms, because they are the ones that are now deciding. They don't like to talk about jobs disappearing. They like to talk about tasks disappearing and hours disappearing. But of course, it means jobs. It means people. What they don't know is if we get rid of our graduate recruitment or halve graduate recruitment, what happens in 10 years? Who becomes the level, one manager? Who becomes the board in 20 years if all of your graduate intake? And I think we're still at the point where companies don't quite know what to do with this big change that we're having.
In terms of the impact of AI, you think this is the beginning of the storm?
So I think definitely, it's really difficult to attribute exactly which jobs are being lost due to AI, which jobs are being lost due to increased cost of business. We cannot really pinpoint that. But what we can see is what the intentions of the AI companies are. They are very explicit about what their goal is. They all, OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, xAI, Elon Musk's company, Anthropic, and more, they all have as a mission to build what they call superintelligence. This means AI that is more competent and can replace people at all tasks and can eventually outcompete humans. Are they there yet? No. Are they trying the hardest to get there as fast as possible? Yes. And they're investing.
You've got the boss of Anthropic, don't you, Dario Mondi, saying that half of all entry-level jobs in an office are going to disappear. Half.
Exactly.
In terms of what is being done already, that is leading to a reduction in the hiring of white-collar jobs, not the bars and the retail, but what kind of functions is AI performing now that means they don't need to hire as many graduates?
So right now with AI, we're seeing the biggest advances on software development. This is really a big thing that these AI companies are focusing on. Their idea is if we automate the development of software, and especially if we automate the development of AI, we will be able to go faster and faster and faster.
So AI will build itself?
Exactly. This is their explicit goal. How quickly this will happen is hard to tell. If we could predict the future exactly we will all be billionaires. But they are definitely investing billions
Well,
of
there's
dollars.
certainly billions lost in the markets last week because the markets across in the US and in the UK kind of had this moment of panic about exactly this. Software companies, is AI going to take over all of these roles and make these companies obsolete?
But that's still throwing ahead, and we'll come back to it. But in terms of right now, if you go to a consultancy firm or an accountancy firm or a legal firm, any of the jobs that that bright graduates have traditionally been going after, I mean, you are saying, Helia, that there is also a reduction there.
Yeah, I mean, you had PwC recently. They had this ambition just a few years ago to hire 100,000 new people, and they've now said they're not going to meet that commitment. And in fact, last year they closed down, I think, about 5,000 positions globally. And so you've got these mega firms that were creating, huge number of jobs now saying, well, we're not sure we can do that.
I mean, for the last 2 or 3 years, while this debate has been running hot, all the advocates of AI have been saying, oh, look, people have been warning about the internet and the television and everything for years. And technology always gives us new tools. They become tools that people will use, and we shouldn't panic. Is it already here before we knew?
I think it's starting, and a lot of experts have been warning about this for years. It's just this hasn't reached the vast majority of lawmakers and the vast majority of governments. To throw a historical analogy, like for example, the car did lead to the disappearance of the vast majority of horses. In this case, we are the horses, and the horses were headed to the glue factory after cars were invented. So this is what a lot of experts are warning about, like Nobel Prize winners like Geoffrey Hinton, sometimes even the CEOs of these companies themselves. These companies often have a kind of a double speak where their lobbyists and spin doctors say there's nothing to worry about, keep calm, carry on, let us do what we want, no regulation, while their own CEOs go on the record talking about white-collar bloodbath or even up to human extinction.
How does it spill over then into the blue-collar jobs and the service industry jobs that Helia has just been talking about in today's figures? I mean, we've all been through the airport and seen that funny robot on wheels kind of trundling down the restaurant. And it's not quite clear what it does, but it seems to take away trays. But presumably that was a person taking away trays before. I mean, again, people have been saying, well, this is now where everyone should become a plumber or open a bar or do a sort of a people-to-people
yoga teacher
job. But actually, can AI and robotics do some of that too?
Yeah, so I think one interesting thing is that 10 years ago, a lot of people, even in the AI field, would say, well, obviously AI will be fantastic very quickly at formal methods, at mathematics, at writing code, but it will struggle with human comprehension and understanding emotions and nuance. And then we started having first with GPT-3, then with a big explosion of ChatGPT, and now with the more advanced models that are very clearly very capable of understanding nuance. Some people are developing parasocial relationships with these AI systems. They are not exactly
falling in love.
They're falling in love with these AI systems. They are becoming obsessed with these AI systems. This is a concerning development in society, but fundamentally this means that these AI systems can speak like humans can. They can impersonate humans very easily, and they're handling a lot of this nuance pretty well, against all expectations, while also being really competent at maths, really competent at writing code, and so on.
I mean, if you look at the Kung Fu robots from China that we've just seen, it's kind of astonishing. And you're watching
now they can dance. They're going to take over our jobs for sure.
Well, I mean, they're pretty sophisticated, and obviously, what that makes you think is not necessarily the bar job or the masseuse, but certainly the soldier.
Yes. I mean, look, I think the issue is that the AI, the impact of AI is that happening so rapidly that people don't know how to keep up with it. But I would say that when I speak to people within the biotech world, for example, where AI is being used quite extensively, or within the legal world where AI is being used and is being talked about as replacing lots of lawyers, there are still problems. This is not a system that has yet, you said, is it here now? Certainly when I talk to people, you've got a whole world in California that are going to preach that there's going to be superintelligence in 3, 4, 5 years' time. But I think in the real world, in terms of integrating AI into companies effectively, where things at the high end are working, we're still not quite there.
But if you take the law, where lots of lawyers will tell you, well, we're still going to need human lawyers, we're still going to need human judgment and a human interface for clients. So, senior lawyers are still going to exist. Where do they think senior lawyers are going to come from?
Exactly right.
If they don't need junior lawyers anymore?
Exactly right, and I think that's the thing that I think boardrooms are struggling with in terms of when you talk to people at board level who work in professional services, what they're talking about is if we go down this route, what happens in a decade, in 2 decades' time,
is there a
when
choice?
We need to have managers. There won't be any managers.
When you say if we go down this route, aren't we already there? I think we've gone down it.
I think there is a choice. I think there is always a choice, and a lot of the narrative from the AI industry is to tell us that we don't have a choice, but we almost always have. Like also with other major technological developments in the past, most countries around the world don't have nukes, and we have nuclear non-proliferation for a reason. There was a different path where every country has nuclear weapons, and we would be in a very unstable world. Probably we wouldn't even be here recording this podcast today. Instead, we chose the path, and our leaders chose the path where we restricted nuclear proliferation, and we have not had a nuclear war since World War II, which is a fantastic achievement. So I think we do have a choice. This doesn't mean rejecting all AI. I think there's a lot of AI systems that are tools that help people do their job better, that are very useful. Things like AlphaFold from DeepMind, based here in the UK. It's only trained on data about proteins, and it solves scientific questions about proteins. That's really helpful. What we should avoid is superintelligence, AI that is built to replace all humans at all tasks and to make us not be in control of our economy anymore.
And what happens if we don't? If we let this run riot? Or to those countries who let it run riot? Because the world won't agree on this.
So, unfortunately, top AI experts, Nobel Prize winners, and even the CEOs of AI companies warn that superintelligence could cause human extinction. This is beyond just job loss. This is literally the end of the human species on the planet. And these warnings are very serious. And if we continue on this path, this is what, again, many top experts warn about. And I think we have a choice to not do this. We have made this the right choice before in history with dangerous technologies. We can do it again.
But how do we get people to take that seriously? Because the rise of the machines has been a Hollywood theme for decades now. And we just kind of think, well, that's fiction.
I think things are changing now. So I am seeing, I think just yesterday or 2 days ago, Hugh Grant was talking about the threat from AI and human extinction. And this is reaching millions of people right now. People like Geoffrey Hinton, Nobel Prize winner, a great British scientist, has been
one of the godfathers of AI.
Yes, one of the godfathers of AI has been warning about it.
But how are they saying it will happen?
Yeah, so it's difficult to predict exactly the way, but the direction of travel is quite clear. If we have AI systems that are fully autonomous, vastly smarter than us, integrated across the economy or critical parts of the economy, we have essentially handed over control over our world and our economy and our power.
Won't there always be an off switch?
Right now, we don't have these off switches. I think if we had them, that would be a much better situation. But even right now, we don't really have them. Even if a CEO of one of these major companies is concerned and thinks we need to shut it down, this is going too far, he doesn't have a big red button on his desk. He needs to call his engineers, and his engineers will call a data center, and they will say, sorry, it's too expensive to shut down. It's going to take us a few days to turn it on again. Try again next time. We don't even have the infrastructure to really make this choice. I believe we should build it. I believe we should keep the choice and the option available to turn it off if it's going too far. But we don't have it right now, and it's time to build it.
I mean, are you really saying that your group exists to warn against human extinction?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And this is also what top AI experts, Nobel Prize winners, and even the CEOs of some of these companies are warning about. And this is a serious warning.
And how seriously do you think the authorities are taking it?
I think right now, most governments are doing, frankly, like nearly nothing. But this is mostly because they are not aware. So,
I mean, do they think you're crackers?
So far,
when you put these warnings out?
In practice, no. So far, most of them just have never heard about, first of all, what AI companies are building. They're not just building chatbots, but building superintelligence. Again, when it will come is a different question, but that's the direction of travel. And second of all, in our experience, we started at the end of 2024 to just brief all lawmakers in this country about the issue, what's the state with AI, where it's going, what the experts are warning about. And now, 1 year later, after over 150 briefings, we have more than 100 lawmakers in the UK across political parties recognizing the risk of extinction from AI and calling for binding regulation.
Can you just explain what is the difference between asking ChatGPT to write a piece of code and superintelligence?
Yeah. So the ChatGPT you're using right now is mostly, on your end, is mostly a chatbot. It's an interface where you can ask questions and you get some answers. Already, the ChatGPT that OpenAI has in their own servers is much more powerful and can do many more things. Many of these models are not yet released to the public. It can write code. It can use computers directly. We have seen this recently with the Moltbook and Moltbot situation. It can use most tools that you could use from a computer, which is a lot of tools in the modern economy. And they are making this better and better. Superintelligence would be that, but smarter than people, with access to computers, access to physical infrastructure, and much, much more capable than the systems that we have right now.
Helia, I mean, do you hear this as a concern?
I do.
In business?
I think bizarrely, you hear it most with those within the tech industry. It's, you're absolutely right that the people...
Because they're the only ones who know what's possible.
The people, they're also within that bubble. So there's a very strange thing where tech CEOs have no idea how long it takes to implement technology in real society, and that lag sometimes maybe our saving grace. But lots of people within technology are warning about these kind of problems. It's when I think that the problems you have is, for example, Europe was very hard on regulation after there was a letter saying there could be big problems with AI and superintelligence, and extinction, I think, was part of that big letter. But Europe has fallen behind when it comes to technology. The US is completely myopically fixated on not falling behind China, who has integrated AI and robotics much more effectively across the economy than even the US has. So because of these competing forces, I think you've got company bosses who go, yeah, I see this as risky. I see there's a problem. I see the dangers, but we cannot afford to slow down. We cannot afford to stop. And I think that's the danger. But that doesn't mean that people in the UK cannot make different decisions. And by the way, there are lots of much more prosaic problems that are going to impact the jobs market and the economy and be problems created by AI
I was going to say,
before extinction.
So what are the challenges that the Treasury needs to be thinking about, and the sort of the policy levers that it needs to start thinking differently about, given the jobs market is going to change dramatically?
Well, I mean, you need to have some really bold thinking. I think you've also got this problem, don't forget, Krish, in the UK, we have a problem in addition to all of this, with inactivity. We've got almost 1 million people in the UK who are not in education or training, and we don't know why exactly.
But might we not start thinking about that differently? In a world where, what you're both really saying is a lot of people aren't going to be inactive, and we've got X million people who are economically inactive at the moment. And that's just kind of going to be the reality in the future anyway.
Well, I mean,
so
if you were Elon Musk, you'd say, well, don't worry,
Exactly.
Krish, because no one needs a pension, no one needs to work, because the bounty from AI, because all of these companies are going to be so much more productive now they've got rid of the horses, that we're all going to be living in. I mean,
is it worth it having a new deal, trying to get young people into basic jobs that may not exist in 5 or 10 years' time?
I think you're right to call that out, but the problem you have is that when young people do not get jobs early in their career, it normally means that they suffer from problems with their careers going all the way through their lives, and their earnings are capped. Now, if the world of work completely changes and revolutionizes, and in a way that you couldn't have anticipated, you have to throw everything out. But I don't know if anyone has, in Treasury is thinking about universal basic income. That's not on the table. We can't even address the problem that we can see, let alone a problem that we have no sight of yet.
What is the argument that the AI evangelists make as to how this will produce rapid economic growth?
So some of them simply say that we should build these AI systems and let them take over the economy and hope that they are benevolent to us. And this might sound like a joke, but they do. It's hard to give the best case for this scenario. Others generally will say that the vague point about all technologies will destroy some old activities and create new ones. But I think with most of them, especially with most of the CEOs and the executives, less so the spokespeople, they are quite honest about the fact that they're trying to replace most people at most tasks. And then they give a token concession about perhaps there will be a universal basic income. So all jobs will be gone, but people will be paid by the government or by this company that they control. Or simply they will live in a post-scarcity society where AIs are doing everything and they're controlling the entirety of the economy, and we are a bit like animals in a zoo, but we are well fed because AIs keep us around. This is what now Elon Musk has moved on to saying. He's not talking about humanity keeping control. He's talking about, well, obviously, once AI is smart enough, we will just be pets to the AI, and let's just hope that we don't get put down by the new AI overlords. And I think fundamentally, all of these visions are deeply unappealing, I think, for most human beings. I don't want to be a pet. I think you all don't want to be pets of AIs either. But I do think we can chart a different path. Doesn't mean stopping all AI, but it means drawing a clear red line on things like superintelligence that are simply very, very bad for our species and our society.
And how do you think it would happen? I mean, would it have to be a sort of a UN type agreement across the world that people agree not to do certain things?
I think it should be both at a domestic and international level. I think
But it hasn't worked, has it? Because we had an AI summit where there was supposed to be a group that was led by Yoshua Bengio that were going to tie people's hands and make sure they worked ethically. Hasn't worked, hasn't proved effective because of all of those competing forces.
I think, frankly, governments haven't even tried. Like, the group by Yoshua Bengio is just writing a report. I'm sure, Yoshua is doing heroic work in writing this report, but he doesn't have powers to intervene. And I think, for example, the UK, the Labour government promised in its manifesto that they would regulate the most powerful AI systems. So far, we have seen nothing being done about this. We've seen this commitment dropped. But
because of fear, basically, again, that the UK economy is weak, and therefore we have to do everything we can to attract growth, even if that is, making a pact with the devil.
It is a pact with the devil, but I think there is a narrow path where we can succeed, where we keep most of the AI systems that are helping us with our work, but we say a clear no to superintelligence.
Just on the idea of regulation, how could you regulate AI without AI?
I think we've done a great, or pretty good job at least, as humans regulating a lot of technologies. Ultimately.
Well, I mean, arguably the regulators are struggling with television, and that's a 20th century technology. I mean, when it comes to social media and AI, forget it. They're not doing anything.
I think it's true that institutions have gotten worse and there's been a decay, but I think it's also because people are engaging with them less, and a lot of governments have started to become kind of frankly more cowardly about their position. Governments exist to set the rules of the game so companies can compete on the market. And this has always been the case. When tobacco companies, it was found out that tobacco causes cancer, governments stepped in. Of course, tobacco companies fought tooth and nail. They did propaganda campaigns to smear scientists revealing this, even though they were well aware about this. But governments stood up for their citizens and set the rules of the game. This doesn't mean that these companies are gone. We still have tobacco companies that are they have pretty good valuations. They just were forced to move away from the thing that was clearly dangerous to most people onto less dangerous and more beneficial economic activities. And this can be done again.
But listen, if we say, before superintelligence and human extinction happens, I think the argument that the tech bosses make is there's a whole cachet of jobs that we don't know about that are going to emerge. We can't see them yet because they're going to come for the generation after. So you've got this one generation that are going to be stuck because essentially they're going to come at the time when jobs are disappearing. And we haven't yet realized what the next possibilities are, but that there will be new opportunities based around a more optimistic reading of what AI can do in terms of problem solving, in terms of fixing things, in terms of creating a world where scarcity is not as problematic.
I mean, that's what the evangelists say, but on what basis are you repeating it? When you say there will be a future?
Maybe this is the failure of mankind, that we can't quite picture, baddies in an office trying to, allow the world to completely dissolve and fall apart. I can't believe that we will get to the brink and not look back. I think the problem becomes with technology like AI, that you get to the brink and you think, no, I want to step back, but it's too late because the technology, and I think that's the thing about superintelligence, is it's no longer, the program is no longer taking cues from the person.
Well, what about the fact, Andrea, that, that we do actually still thirst for human contact and human thought and human emotion? We could put out a podcast created by AI, the technology exists now, instead of bothering to take up 40 minutes of Helia's time when she's trying to get a piece on the news. We could have just asked Google Notebook to make us a podcast about this issue with these positions. And I do that sometimes with research just out of curiosity, to say, make me a podcast on this issue. And it's awful. Is the truth. You can't bear to listen to it because it doesn't have a human quality to it. I mean, is there not some hope that just because it can doesn't necessarily mean we will want it?
I think this is where we need to make our choices, though, because
the same applies to Hollywood and drama and TV and all those sorts of things.
But I think definitely we do have a choice, and we can choose to prefer the human contact and the human interaction, but we have to actively make this choice. And if we don't take a stand, what's happening is that in practice, more and more content is now AI generated. Yes, this podcast is not, and I'm glad to be here as a real human being and not an AI. But there is more and more content that is now being produced with AI.
And we'll probably go into a sort of a hybrid world where quite a lot of the movie is AI.
Yeah.
But it maybe still has real stars.
But to your point that it's terrible, some of this stuff, I'd be more worried that, in Jeff Hinton's list of professions that are going to be hit by AI, journalism is front and center. But I'd be more worried if my Netflix AI program could produce some movies that I actually want to watch. It can't even predict what movies I would like to watch. So I feel like all of, as you said, it's not just that we hanker for
maybe that's because your husband
contact.
Just goes on and watches stuff that you don't really like when you're not there.
It's always possible.
Yes.
It's always human error in the center of it. But imagine, I don't think it's just that we hanker after the human touch. I think at the moment, I can only talk to what I hear. At the moment, AI programs are useful and they are helping with some tasks. But the biggest risks I hear about are that they are making mistakes and that they are being adopted too quickly. And so people are assuming in very important fields that this program is going to deliver the right results and the right research. And I've heard that from a lawyer and a scientist recently. And that is a bigger worry for me in 2026.
Final thought from you both. If you were 20 years old, trying to work out what to do with yourself, what should you be thinking about, Andrea?
That's a great question. I think ultimately, I don't have good job advice, but one piece of advice is if you find this concerning, if you find where this is going concerning, contact your lawmaker, contact your politicians. They don't bite. They are real people like you for now, and they care about what you care about. And they more and more are hearing from constituents that constituents are concerned about AI and concerned where AI is going, including the warnings about superintelligence, and they want them to act. And if they hear this from enough people, things will change. I think we should not be nihilistic. I think we can pull back from the brink before we get there.
I think, what would I do if I was 20? I mean, not become a software engineer, that's for sure. But I would tell you that today, when we're doing a piece on unemployment and we went up to Birmingham and we're talking to these young women who have been out of work and really struggled to get back into the employment market. And one of them, who was a massive firecracker, just complete pizzazz, and her boss was saying she's a force of nature, she's already been promoted. She was out of work for 4 years. And that cycle of not being in work wasn't just challenging for her mental health because she couldn't afford to do all the things she wanted and she was struggling with her bills. It hit her confidence. So this world where we no longer need to improve ourselves intellectually, and also we don't need to work and we don't need to have purpose, I find it very hard to buy into that because I don't see how people can be happy in that world.
Thank you both very much indeed. That's the Fourcast. On that cheery note, bye-bye.